verse 10. Now what happens is, this principle is this. The church unstoppable dares to care, and when they care, people get converted. Lives get changed. When people dare to care. Dare to care. The church unstoppable. Compelled by love. Involved in lives. Acts chapter 17, verse 10 through 15 today, dear ones. And it's in Berea, and I'm just going to go through here, and I'm just going to do it how I do it. Are you with me, or are you again me? All right. As soon as it was night, now I just got to explain something to you. You may not realize this, but where we are is back in Thessalonica. And what's happened is that Paul and Silas and Timothy have shared the gospel, and people have got converted. And here's what happens when the gospel is shared. Now listen, I've taught you this principle a couple of times, but it doesn't hurt to go over it. Sometimes there's what we call conversion. That means people are changed. They're converted. They've repented. They've changed their mind about life. They've come over to the side of Jesus, and they're going to live a Christ-centered life. Or, number two, there's aversion. There's conversion or aversion. People say, no, I'm against that. And so here's what's going to happen to a person that cares and is compelled by the message of the gospel. You're going to deal with conversion and aversion. And they were dealing with aversion here. And so Paul and Silas and Timothy had to get out of town. All right? And so that's what's happening. They had to get out of town for the sake of the converts. Converts. It works both ways, converts. Some of you, I do that to test you to see if you're listening. Do you believe that or not? You don't believe that. Okay, anyway. So anyway, here we are, verse 10. As soon as it was night. I love this next phrase. The brothers. That blows my mind because in Thessalonica, these people have only been saved for a week or two. But they're already part of the family of God. Huh, that's really cool. Anyway, so the brothers sent Paul and Silas away to Berea. Now Timothy's with them. He just wasn't mentioned. On arriving there, they went to the Jewish synagogue. Why, church? Why did they go there? I've been teaching you this. I know preaching oftentimes isn't because it was their custom. All right, let's go back. Now the Bereans were of a more noble character than the Thessalonians. I like that word noble character. It's where we get our name Eugene from. Isn't that interesting? You ever know somebody by the name of Eugene? Probably didn't. They changed it to Gene. Because if they were going by Eugene, they'd get beat up in the playground. But anyway, what that means, just so you know, Eugene means kind-spirited or unbiased. That's precisely what that means. More noble-minded means they were kind-spirited and unbiased. You understand that? Now, it doesn't say that the Thessalonians weren't. It says they were more noble-minded. Get a hold of that. The Thessalonians weren't bad people. They had some bias. Okay, I've gone way off on a tangent, but you needed to know that. All right. Now, why? So they were more a noble character than the Thessalonians, for they received the message with great eagerness and examined the Scriptures every day to see if what Paul said was true. Now, I need to explain something in verse 11. A lot of people, I'm not decrying or saying anything negative about preachers when they preach this text, but they focus in on the Bereans and talk that we should be like the Bereans. And in some ways we should, but not in verse 11, because the Bereans are still lost there. You may not get that, but as I'm reading this, I'm saying, wait a minute, but that's a good thing. They're searching the Scriptures, but they're not saved yet. They're just kind-spirited and unbiased, and they're spiritually sensitive. They're wanting to seek God, and so they're willing to give Him a hearing. Now, verse 12, watch what happens. Many of the Jews believed, as did also a number of prominent Greek women and many Greek men. When the Jews in Thessalonica learned that Paul was preaching the Word of God at Berea, they went there too, agitating the crowds and stirring them up. Aversion. You see that? The brothers immediately, the brothers again. Wait a minute. These are the brothers in Berea. These are the new converts. They care. You see that? Does anybody see it? That just blows my mind. The brothers immediately sent Paul to the coast, and Silas and Timothy stayed at Berea. The men who escorted Paul brought him to Athens, and then left with instructions for Silas and Timothy to join him ASAP, as soon as possible. that they dared to care. What did they care about? They cared for one another. They cared about one another. Wait a minute. There's several ways that there's care in this verse. The brothers, the brand new converts, yes, they went out by night, but they still went out. They still went out of their comfort zone to go and gather where Paul and Silas and Timothy found themselves. They still united and came together as a congregation. They cared enough to put themselves in somewhat of a risk. It's the same way back here in Berea when the Jews came and agitated and stirred everybody up, and the brothers sent Paul off. They gathered together and they identified themselves with the gospel. They cared enough to do that, to stick their necks out just a little bit. I like that. I think that Paul also risked himself enough to put his neck on the line. We know that he'd been beaten and stoned with rocks. We knew that he was so compelled to share the gospel. He cared so deeply for one another that he would leave. How did the missionaries care for one another? Well, you know what? Timothy and Silas, they stayed behind in Berea for a while. They actually were putting themselves at risk for the aversion and for persecution. They cared for one another. They put themselves out there. They took a risk. Oftentimes when we come across the path of someone that's not in our circle, our clique, or our family, or our group, we're too busy to take a risk. Or they just might not look like me. They just might not be of my socioeconomic level. And you know, I dare say I've been burned before when I took a risk on helping someone or caring for someone. And I'm just not in the mood to get burned again. That's how we think. And so therefore we go through our lives with a dreadful problem, and I've seen this begin to infiltrate itself into Christianity. I call it the escalation of isolation. And this is a truism, dear ones, that's happening in the Christian community. It's starting to dissipate, but it happened for a while. Christians would, even in the church, they would say, oh dear, you know, I don't like what the pastor's teaching, or I don't like what they're doing, and so therefore I'm going to start a home church. And so I like to get my little voice, and maybe it's not a good thing, but I'm doing it anyway because I have fun with it. And so they start a home church. And they're compelled by the love of the gospel to share it, and so they share with their neighbor. This is a true story I'm telling you. I can't tell the names to protect the innocent. You know, Dragnet, that's another television show I'm part of. Is that Dragnet? I think it was. Anyway. Thank you, Sergeant Friday. Okay. What was I talking about? Oh, yeah. True story. So we start a home church. This does not happen. You do not know who I'm talking about, so put that out of your mind. And they have a neighbor, and they invite the neighbor over, and the neighbor is a single mom with 2 kids, and she gets saved. She gets saved. Hallelujah! The kids, on the other hand, are rowdy and play video games, and they bring their secular lifestyle right into the holy house. And the family says, oh no, what are we going to do now? You see, the isolation is escalating, where we begin to cower and draw back because we know that we're going to put ourselves at risk when we stretch our necks out. And sometimes it's also where we start going with their way. It's dangerous. You have to be so ready to fight the fight of the attacks of the enemy when he comes on. He says, it's okay. Go their way. No, I will not. But I'll still care about them. I'll still love them. I'll still nurture them. I'll still mentor them. Instead, recoiling, escalation of isolation. Get away, get away, get away. And when we see the gospel, it's not going any further than what our tongue can create. What do we do? What do we do? Got a couple ideas to share with you. Number one, care for your leaders. I don't hardly ever stand up here and talk about myself or anything, but I'll tell you, I'm going to be 58, all right? And yesterday I was pushing a wheelbarrow full of rocks. I pushed 10 of those wheelbarrows. And I had to stop one time and take a deep breath. I'd go, oh, that's hard. I'm wearing out a little bit. And I'm not going to be here. I'm not going to be here forever. And you know, you're going to have another path. Some of you are young. Hey, you young people, you're in your 20s. I'm 58. I mean, let's just be real about this, okay? Let's be realistic. Yeah, maybe I got 14 good years left. But what's happening after that? You're going to have another pastor, another leader. These people cared for one another. They cared for their pastor. You see how they rally around him? You see how they send him off to protect him? You know what happens in many, many churches today? The poor pastor hardly has any time to pray. And so a lot of times when he comes into the pulpit, he's mad, or he's defeated, or he's depressed, or discouraged, because nobody cares. That's his perspective. Of course, you're saying, oh, I care. And no, you do. You do. I'm just telling you, care for your leaders. Care for them. Nurture them. Gather around them. Care for discipleship. What did Paul say? Probably to Timothy and Silas. And by the way, he left Luke back in Philippi. We hadn't forgotten about that. They cared enough that they would splinter off and do whatever it takes to make a disciple. That team split up. And many times do we, well, I don't want to see us split up. I like my little group. Let's not grow. Let's just keep it like this. That way it won't get messy or dirty, because I already know all your dirty laundry and I'm happy with it. Instead of doing whatever it takes, people, okay, care, whatever it takes. Care for your leaders. A couple other thoughts I had. Fill up all your relational connections. All of them. And I love it. Some of you can only relate with one person. Yourself in the mirror. Oh, no. Some of you can relate with, it's like the Lego. Who knows what a Lego is? Yeah. A Lego has these little things that you connect with, right? You connect other Legos with. All right? That's how we connect with the relationships. We stick our Lego block. It might just have 2 holes in it. It might have 4. It might have 16, like me. I got a lot of connections I can connect. Some of you just do 2. Some of you just do more. Fill them all up. Connect. Care enough to go to the max of your relationship potential. And then if somebody says to me, well, there's a clique over there, I say, no, it's not. They're filled up with their relationship connections. And that is a good thing. It's a good thing. And then when somebody dies or the pastor moves off or something, you got a new connection to fill up. I'm just being real. Protect and serve. Protect and serve. Pray and serve. Pray and fill up. Be a person of valor. The Bible talks about that. That means being a person of strength and ability. God has strengthened you. God's made you able. Be a person of valor. Care for one another. You know, Sandy and I love animals. We do. And you just wouldn't believe us, but we cared enough that we wanted to propagate bluebirds. And so a couple, 3 or 4 years ago, we got a bluebird house. Kent made me a bluebird house. Kent, that house is up and going. Bluebirds are using it. The first house we put it right in the backyard. Don't do that, because you're going to get a crazy bluebird. And this bluebird house is probably just 50 feet from the house. And when they started making their nest, now I guess the mother's on the nest, the father, the bluebird, is beating himself up against our windows because he sees another bluebird. And he's knocking himself out on the window. But what is he doing? He's giving of himself to perpetuate his species. He's doing everything in his power to protect and to serve his family and his nest. And that's what compels us. Everything, God, everything to you for the sake of eternity, for the sake of souls. We don't want to see Satan get one of them. Not one. We must care for one another. It's essential, and this church did it. Well, I'm about done here. I've gone way over, and that's a bad sign sometimes if the pastor's not prepared, but I'm prepared. So anyway, I'm going to give you the last thing. They care for one another, and they also care for the lost. Have you ever been lost? Some of you are going, no, I'm like Daniel Boone. I was just confused for days. I've never been lost. But you might have been lost in a big city. You might have gone out on a hike, and for that moment, you realized, I'm lost. Anybody ever had that feeling? That's what I believe was happening to the Bereans. Now, here's what I want. This is an imperative principle for us to see the world turned upside down. That the church that dares to care cares for the lost. It cares about lostness. All right? You know, there might, oh God willing, be some people that have come to the church today that have not made a decision about Jesus. And perhaps they've realized that moment, I'm lost. I know I'm searching for something. I know I'm searching for some way out. And so they come into the church and they're saying, okay, tell me. And so it's our responsibility to tell them, but then they take the scriptures home, and guess what they do? We always tell people that will come to church and they'll come up front and they'll say, they pray the prayer and they get saved and baptized, and then the church says, now, they say to the pastor, what do I do now? And the pastor says, well, read the book of John. Everything will be just fine. See you later. It's true. It's true. But not so with the people that are really seeking Him and they've realized they're lost. Just like the Bereans, spiritually sensitive, spiritually open, coming in with the gospel, cared enough for the lost people to bring them the message of hope. They cared enough to take it and go home and read it and get saved because the preacher is a flawed human being. You must search the scriptures on your own. I tell these stories and sometimes I get in trouble for them. But I'm just me. I let God work through me. You let God work through you. Have a heart and a care to dare for the lost people. All right? Now, what did they do? They connected. Paul went into the synagogue. He connected. What else? He directed them. I'm going through this quick because I'm running out of time. He directed them to scriptures. And what they do, they inspected. I like that. That is so cool. Connect, direct, and inspect. Put that up here, because when you care for the lost, that's how you do it. You connect with them. Connect where they are. What's your hobby? What's your sport? You might be an online gamer. I'm Jesus right here, right now. Connect with them. That wasn't a very good illustration, but I'm trying to connect with the younger people. So anyway. And then direct them. Show them the way. This is for you if you care to read any deeper in the scriptures on your own. Read Acts chapter 13. That's the sermon Paul was preaching over and over. He was the evangelist that would come to our church, and he comes up, and the evangelist preaches such a powerful sermon, and you're all going, gee, man, we ought to get him for our preacher. No, don't, because that's the same sermon he preaches everywhere. He's getting good at it. He's getting good. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's his job, to go around and preach the same sermon and get people saved. All right? Direct him. Then inspect. Here's something that happens. Care is contagious. Caring is contagious. When lost people, somebody that realizes they're in need, and you really care about them, I got news for you. They're going to start caring. Oh, my goodness. We all struggle with care. Even Christians, the story of Mary and Martha. Who's reading the Facebook group page here? Anybody? Okay, I'm posting daily devotionals on there. And I posted about Mary and Martha on there. Both loved Jesus. These are two ladies, sisters. They lived in a town called Bethany. And Jesus came through town and they invited them in, and they both loved Jesus. And Mary's in the kitchen, and she's got to milk the goat, get the butter, and she's got to get the water from the well, and she's just got to stoke the fire, and she's beside herself, all these things she's got to do, and she's caring, she's so anxious. And over here is Mary, her sister, sitting over there at Jesus' feet. You lazy, good for nothing. Jesus, don't you care? And he says, oh, Martha, 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 you're so stressed out. She's chosen the better. Caring for Jesus. Just to meet with him wherever you are. At the stress of the rat race, the stress of raising a family, the stress of managing your finances, let him meet you right where you are. Dare to Care Church. Unstoppable. Good Christians. Sometimes people just like you and me, sometimes we start letting that care go. And the cares of the world start wrapping up around us, and we don't even realize it's happening. Jesus talks about it. He talks about how the Word of God has been planted in our hearts, and we're doing pretty good, but then after a while, the cares of the world and greed, money and stuff, keeping up with the Joe, they just start strangling us out, where pretty soon we just don't care. I don't have any concern. I don't have any interest anymore. The tomb's empty, and I don't care if the church is or not. Tomb's empty. And I had an eye-opening experience with this, and what I want for you today as you leave is just say, God, I'm going to dare to care. I'm going to care for one another. Take my attention off myself and think about people I come in contact with everywhere, and I'm going to care about them. And I'm going to care about lostness, about lost people. I want to connect. I want to direct. And I want to inspect. It was probably back when I was becoming a big shot Christian, and I don't know if you know what that is, but it's where you start puffing your chest out thinking you know all the answers. And I didn't have a title or anything, but it was Sunday morning, and I'm getting up, and I'm planning my whole day, man. Let's get to church. Let's get it over with, That's what really the truth is. Let's get to church. Let's get it over with so I can get out, and I can start doing everything Mark wants to do. And I was telling Sandy all of my plans. And she, a guy can get ready in 10 minutes, right? Or 5. Or some of you too. But women take longer to get ready. So she's in there getting ready, and I'm telling her all the stuff I'm going to do today. As soon as we get church over with, get it out of the way so I can start living. But I'm a big Christian when I walk into church. But what had happened to me is I became really it's a real hard problem to get over with when you become all about you. So I'm telling her, and pretty soon she starts crying. What's the matter? What's the matter with you? I didn't say anything. Have you ever done with your wife? What did I do? And she looks at me, choked up, and says, today's my birthday. I'm just telling you, dear ones, this is we're missing stuff every day. Because all we care about is our safety and our protection. We're unwilling in many cases to take risks. Did you know that only 2% of Christians have ever invited somebody to church? But the statistics are in Facts and Trends magazine this month that tell us that 138 unchurched Christians, that at least half of them would come if they were invited to church. At least half of them. But let's be honest, we don't care. What if we dared to share and dared to care? What if? Let's bow our heads and close our eyes.